Welcome to the Surveil Briefing, where we sit down with the people behind Surveil to talk about the real challenges enterprise face when it comes to their cloud, licensing, and AI investments. Surveil is the intelligence layer, helping organizations turn technology complexity into clarity, accountability, and measurable business outcomes. I'm Stuart Blakemore, and today's episode is about something that sounds simple, but changes everything when it actually happens: visibility. Most enterprises we talk to don't just have a cost problem or a governance problem, they have a visibility problem. The moment that veil is lifted, every conversation about spending, licensing, and AI fundamentally shifts. My guest today is Harold Groothedde, COO of Surveil and one of the company's founders. Harold oversees our operational delivery and sees firsthand what happens when enterprises connect their environments for the first time. He's been in the room for hundreds of those moments, and the stories, they're always revealed. So welcome, Harold.
Morning.
Thanks for taking the time. So I wanted to start with your view on, in your role, you see enterprise environments connected, and you probably see it every day, right? What's the most common reaction you get from an enterprise customer when they first see their data?
Yeah, great question. I mean, for me, it's the surprise at the scale of what they're seeing. So often people don't realize that they have the scale, they have this amount of staff, they have this amount of expenditure, they have this amount of security type governance issues or something like that, or opportunities. So they can see, oh, this is going really well, didn't realize this. So it's just that realization of what they didn't know before when they look at that data.
And do you get any kind of shock moments or any kind of denial moments where they go, no, that can't be right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, we quite often elevate some substantial savings, and there's often a disbelief around that. And sometimes a bit of a protection around it, as opposed to sort of, absorbing it and saying, actually, there's an opportunity here to reinvest this and save this money and turn, ways to value. But I remember the little cases, like a shock moment when we showed a geographical map of where their users are. And somebody looked at it and said, we don't have any users in Russia. And there was silence in the room and suddenly people scattered everywhere. So you get those few shock moments as well.
Yeah, it's that kind of Jack Nicholson moment.
Yes.
Can you handle the truth?
Exactly.
Thing. But before that moment, with how are most organizations handling their data before we get involved?
Yeah, so in most cases, look, Microsoft gives some reporting, and if you just stick with the Microsoft side of our platform, Microsoft gives some reporting, but there's two issues with that. One is, generally speaking, most of the data is only available to the people that have admin access to see it, right, in the first place. Whereas in our platform, everybody can see it. And then what they do is they get those people that can see it, then have the task of generating these daily, weekly, monthly reports based on the data they can see. So it's an onerous amount of work on them in the first case. In the second case, it's interpreted the way they want to interpret it. So therefore they're not getting this genuine view of what there is there. There is some bespoke development in-house where they do get some of this stuff. But again, the complexity of the Microsoft data can be extremely confusing and misleading. We've learned this over 6 years of developing in the space, that you really got to understand that data to interpret it correctly.
When you say, I've seen it as well, where you see a kind of myriad of spreadsheets that kind of all sort of people are coordinating, and one person's spreadsheet is slightly different from another's, and the numbers never match up.
Yeah.
That kind of visibility problem, what falls between the gaps in that environment? What data is missing, do you think? Is it cost data? Is it kind of usage data, security data, anything like that?
I think it's a combination of everything, and the reason is that the people that are presenting the data or the people that want to see the data generally have a specific view that they want to see of that data. That data may not be relevant to somebody else who wants a different view. So somebody who's in procurement would want a very different view on contract status, on savings, etc., renegotiation of their new Microsoft EAs. Whereas a CISO sitting in a company wants to get the governance view of security. So when they look at the one way in spreadsheets, it's like, that doesn't really help me. And then also from a business perspective, a lot of cases the data is published, and this is what Microsoft does as well. They publish the data across the company. So you're an organization of 200,000 users. How do you put some relevance around this? So if I'm somebody sitting in East Asia, I want to know what my data is about. If I'm somebody sitting in Europe, what is relevant to me, as opposed to I see this whole picture. And it's when you start getting more granular that you also start getting more precise around the issues you may have in the organization.
Right, I get you. Do you have any other examples of kind of, not necessarily big wins, but, kind of significantly surfacing, something really important from when we get engaged?
Look, if I look at the two scenarios on the 365 side, without a doubt, the significant change to companies is realizing that the joiners leavers process isn't working as they thought.
Yeah.
Right. So what I say by that is they may have a very good methodical process for joiners leavers from an HR perspective in the company. However, from an identity perspective, it's a very different world. And what happens is, I may say Stuart has left the company, and I send an email to IT to disable Stuart's account. But Stuart's got a sales.Stuart, he's got a procurement.Stuart, he's got an admin.Stuart account. All of these accounts then end up floating. And the typical question and surprise we get from companies and challenge we get from companies is, I've got 7,000 employees, but I need 9,000 Microsoft licenses. Why is that?
Yeah.
Right. Some of it could be they didn't know about contractors and consultants and temps and things like that. But that generally is the biggest surprise of them.
Right. Harold, I wanted to ask you something a little outside of the kind of business piece. I'm always interested in kind of what's behind, especially, being the founder of the business. You obviously had a kind of corporate career before building Surveil. Why did you do it? What drove you to build Surveil?
Look, the first half of my life was in large corporate. And it wasn't really a SaaS world in those days. It was a SAM world. It was an on-prem world, on-prem licensing. So there were challenges that I always felt could be improved, but that wasn't the real issue. And we all thought SaaS was going to be this thing that really makes licensing easy and audits easy. It's not the way today. And then out of my initial corporate life, I ended up doing a lot of consultancy with a consulting company that I started, which was originally a consulting company, to help organizations understand their data, right? To help them understand where their costs are, to help them understand where their opportunities are. And the lack of data available or visibility available to do that really frustrated me. I've been CTO of FTSE 250 manufacturing companies, of banks, etc. And there was just never data available to be able to show this. So that really frustrated me. And actually, the particular opportunity was when we moved a customer to Azure, their entire SAP environment.
Right.
And suddenly there was this chaos because we got the spreadsheet from a billing perspective, which is just hundreds of thousands of lines of nothing anybody understood, right? And that came from a world where we were on-prem, where it is all well organized. We knew what is the production environment, the dev environments, the QA environments, where the e-commerce platform lived, what the costs were for this business. We moved to spreadsheets, so that really kickstarted me into thinking we need a product to help with this.
Okay. So it was kind of a bit of frustration and kind of maybe a bit of inspiration to say, yeah, this can be done easier.
Yeah, it was. The biggest thing for me, though, that surprised me was I thought, okay, let's get these ideas. And of course, we had a brilliant consulting team, so we put these ideas together, started building it. My thought was, well, this must be out there. There must be lots of products that do this.
Yeah.
These companies must be doing that. These companies must be doing that. And then as you go on and you experience, you start digging deeper. Actually, there's nobody doing this. So that was quite a big surprise and a real driver for us.
Yeah.
So we weren't even competing. We were actually just creating things for the first time. And especially in the early days, there was the amount of reporting from Microsoft was extremely limited. It's got better over the years, so we've had to progress into different areas to make sure we add the value. But yeah, it's a journey from that perspective.
Yeah, well, and it's also a kind of dream, isn't it? People dream of finding that niche. So now you run operations for the company, and I know from firsthand that we're moving at an incredible pace. Is there anything about the journey that you've experienced in that space, something that you didn't expect?
Yeah. Look, some of the surprises to me from an operational perspective is the lack of new modern operational procedures that exist in companies and exist in our customers and exist in our partners. And I include ourselves. We've had to learn completely new ways of doing sales, of doing customer success. Times have changed. AI's come in, So for me, that operational challenge of how do we address the world now has been a real interesting challenge, right? And you know it from a sales perspective, how it's changed the whole world of sales, and if anything, to me personally, I think it's more about personal relationships now, right? And quite nice in some ways, because we've got a lot of AI out there generating lots of stuff. But operationally, that then impacts you because you need to understand exactly how you need to approach operations now. How do you make sure your customers are successful? How do you make sure they maintain happiness with being on your platform, that the customer satisfaction is there, that you're making sure that the products that are coming in are being leveraged like they should be leveraged, that the value is being pulled out of them properly. People are paying the bills, of course, that comes with it as well, so there's some of the challenges none of us like doing, but, you get some of those challenges in operation as well.
No, absolutely. Amazing. Because one of the things that I've observed is certainly when we started, the great stuff that you'd built, there was so much in the tool. It was surfacing so much information. We had a danger of overwhelming our end users with so many reports, so much insight. So, it's great that you've kind of helped build a way for us to help those customers succeed with the tool, show them show them some quick wins at the beginning, and then let them kind of grow more into that. I guess, is that something that you're constantly working on, sort of building in simplicity, as it were?
Yeah, look, it's when we developed the product I mentioned earlier, we had a bunch of really skilled consultants that was doing work in the space for our customers. So when we built it, our first fear was, we always want to drive and make sure the customer's happy. That's the end goal. So our first fear was that we weren't giving them enough information, and they'd go further, and then there's no information, or there's missing information, or there's inaccurate information. So that was a real focus for us to drive that. And every time a customer asked us something, we'd say, oh, we can build that for you, and we can build them a screen, right? The net result was there was so much information. So what we've learned over time, as well as we've evolved as from startup to really ramping up now, we've learned that there's a lot of skilled people in the industry that can help us make this thing simple. So we've hired some of the world's best designers, for example, just going through the platform now to make sure we get that journey right, so that if you're a C-level executive looking at it, you start at a high-level area. If you're a administrator, you might log in and see the detail you need to get to very quickly.
Yeah.
So there's been a huge focus around that area. And I have to add, AI is giving us a lot of opportunity in that space as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, but certainly AI is huge for us in simplifying.
From an operational leader's perspective, what's the question you should be asking your team right now?
Obviously money is a big issue for everyone right now. So I would be asking them, are we getting maximum value out of the amount we're spending with Microsoft in our case, or maybe some other multi-cloud vendors, and that do we bring in? That'd be question number one to me, because if we're wasting money, let's get rid of that wastage so we can reinvest the money in real value add. And we've seen that, customers may reduce costs on wastage, they always reinvest it because they want to get better value out of everything. And Microsoft also wants them to have better value. We all want them to have better value. That'd be question number one, I would ask. Are we aware of our data? Are we getting maximum value out of it? Is there things we can do to improve that business return investment?
Okay. When we're talking to an enterprise, how quickly do you think an enterprise can go from what they were doing before to what we can help them do? How quick is that journey?
It's been a passion of mine to make that quick access to data from the beginning, right? It's why fundamentally we've stuck with read-only. It's why we've spent a huge amount of time on the engineering and development side to make sure that onboarding journey is quick and easy. Because in my corporate life, the experiences I've had with tools is you get excited about a platform or a tool, and it just takes a month of Sundays to get into it and start getting the data and start ingesting. So it's always been a real passion. I think we can be very proud of the fact that we can onboard enterprises, and within a day or two, they're starting to see a lot of the value. Some of the things may be like a Copilot adoption dashboard or something like that. We need to understand human behavior, so that might take maybe 2 weeks to get the data. But almost immediately, I say immediately, 24 hours, 48 hours, they're starting to see the data. And we're also updating that data every single night, right? So that's also another key point, that you're getting fresh data. So if you've made a change the night before, you've got data again the next morning.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it's not just about visibility, it's about the timely nature of that visibility. And, I know when we've been presenting customers data back, when you see someone look at their Azure spend and they realize that that spend is up to date to last night. And the look on their face when they realize that is,
and these are big costs, so some of the anomalies we pick up, a simple example in Azure is log analytics, right? For whatever reason, some of the stuff gets turned on automatically by Microsoft and you don't know about it. And the next minute, you've got a £3,000 bill from the last 2 days.
Yeah.
So you've got to get on top of that right away, So some of the stuff is even quicker than a day. You can see it almost immediately. It's really important to stay on top of your costs from that perspective.
And so the other thing that we do, but I'm interested as to whether or not this was in your kind of original ethos, was it's the fact that we can issue alerts for those kind of activities and anomaly detection and all that kind of stuff. Were you always of a view that you wanted the tool to be, if you like, interactive and telling the end user about changes?
Yeah, because everybody can't look at screens, so you don't want to have a daily procedure. In enterprise, you have a lot of daily procedures. They're all scheduled. There's tools that help you schedule them and things like that. You want to get away from that as well and just automatically email an issue to your help desk, your service management platform. You want to be alerted when there's a major security issue. You want to be alerted when, if I'm a business owner, I don't maybe need it immediately, but I need to know that I budgeted 20,000 for next month for a particular service, and I want to know that it's going to go over, before it goes over. And if it goes over, certainly I want to know. So it's always been important from the platform. I think we've got a long way to go still on that to get really interactive. But certainly just alerting people and telling them that it's there, really, really important. We call that smart tagging because we put a bit of intelligence behind it. It's not just an alert.
Yeah.
You can forecast, you can do a few other things with it.
Visibility is, if you like, the first stage of the journey. What do you think builds on top of that? Once a customer has got has got a really good view, what's the next stage? What's the next level of value that they can get to?
So for me, a couple of things. If I look at procurement, for example, to understand spending patterns, to be able to dig in and understand when we're increasing. HR can be looking in the platform to understand where they may have a retention issue. On the team side, you can look in and see who's communicating with who, and you can see which departments are interacting, right? And how they're interacting, how much are they talking to external people. You can even see who all your telcos are in there if you want, So the whole adoption side, what we're doing with SharePoint, how people are using Teams, SharePoint is really important because if we don't understand what our legacy data is doing, what is old, what should be archived and things like that, we have a much higher security risk, right? So getting on top of that kind of data is a next step in there. So there's a lot in the platform around adoption, security, that you can go after next. And it's not just IT, it's HR, it's procurement, it's C-level, it's team support departments, even understanding if your meeting room devices are working properly or not. You can start getting into them if you really want to, core quality issues in the company. So there's a lot to go after. Similar thing on the Azure side, just continually making sure that you're optimizing all of that licensing, that you're understanding, for example, that you may have a high QA spend or dev spend, right? Now, before you implemented something called smart tagging from our side, and you didn't know what was a dev environment and what was a QA environment, as a business person, it's very easy to say, yeah, we want the QA to be the same as the production, right? And everybody says, okay, so IT interprets that and says, okay, build the same. When you expose that and you start looking into it, so besides the obvious initial saves, when you expose it and start looking into it, and you actually start seeing that I'm paying the same for my dev environment as I'm paying for my production environment. And I phone IT and say, what's going on here? And they say, well, you asked us to keep it the same. Well, I didn't mean the same costs. You could have made smaller machines, or you could switch it off over weekends or something like that, So this interpretation of data is a definite next step. And it's actually, in many ways, a bigger save to the company financially, from a security perspective, from a work perspective, than the initial part of the platform, which is showing you your optimization in that.
Well, and the interesting thing, it's certainly beyond optimization. Certainly what I've seen customers using the tool for, certainly over the last year with the adoption of Copilot and other AI tools, is being able to use the tool to, like you say, look at the adoption of their AI tool itself, like with Copilot adoption, but also being able to identify the likely candidates based on their usage of the other Microsoft tools, so that they can target those people, rather than just throwing out licenses and hope they stick. They can be a lot more scientific with the data that we provide. Exactly. And the other thing that I always see is that when you talk to customers and partners who have kind of deployed the tool already for some time, it's about moving from that initial optimization piece into like a steady state. They're not worried about waste creeping back in.
Yeah.
So they're not having to be in a constant mindset of optimization, because they know, everything's being tracked, the benefits being tracked, and the value is being kind of constantly honed and delivered.
To build it into your operational processes instead of having this fire drill at the end of every year when a new Microsoft EA agreement comes up. Everybody gets into fire drill. Have we got the right licenses? But we've wasted licenses now for 9 months, or we've wasted not converting RIs, or we've wasted VMs that we're not using, across the board. You can think of things, Copilot, how expensive is that now? A new E7 license, it costs more than $100 plus per user. If you're not on top of that every month, every year, that's the cost of a laptop you're wasting.
Yeah.
And you multiply that by the thousands of staff you have, or if you have 10 staff, it's 10 laptops. So it's equally important to everyone to really, really stay on top of that, for sure.
I love the fire drill analogy. We should maybe get some a FinOps tabard for people to weigh. I wanted to ask you one final question. Thank you for your time today. What's next? Without giving away any sort of commercial secrets, what's your?
There's two things. The one is we've got a huge amount of data. We've got a lot of customers. We've got a lot of data summarized. We can build some incredible benchmarking around that to help our customers. So really for them to understand, if we send them a particular metric, like the amount of meetings that Stuart has every day, and I look at that and I think, oh, that's a lot, or I might think oh, that's a little, right? But if I compare that to a company of similar size and sector that we're in, and I see that you have 2 meetings a day, and the industry average is 7, then I know this is really low, and that we've got an issue here. Or the other way around, we're spending too much time on meetings. So benchmarking is becoming really key. So we've got all this data. We'll be doing some really fancy stuff in there. But most important, everybody's talking about it, is how we can leverage AI in the platform. Right, that is the future, because we spoke about complexity and having to find information. So we already have an AI assistant that helps you find the information. We've got an AI manager, we've got Copilot, we're looking at agentic stuff, but we can use AI as well when we ingest that data to help us understand it properly. And in the future, I'm not going to go into the details, but let's say that you can look at a platform and choose what you want to see, right? And choose how you want to see it. That's the future. So watch the space.
I will do. Harold, thank you very much for your time.